Good morning. Thank you for tuning in again on all the different ways you're tuning in to Age Well with Dr. Max. I'm Maximilian Fuentes Fuhrmann. Today we're going to talk about probably the most popular topic, aging with memory. So, how does your memory age? Everybody's always so concerned about that. We'll be doing some other shows in the future, if you remember, on dementia, Alzheimer's disease, all these kinds of things. But today we're going to talk about, quote, normal memory changes that happen to everyone. And so I remember to also tell you that I'm not a physician, so we're not going to be talking about any medical concerns. If you do have medical concerns, feel free to write to us, and we will direct you to a geriatric doctor. You can also view the show through Instagram and YouTube and iTunes and Spotify. More things for you to remember. We're just talking this morning about people don't remember things anymore because you just have to remember to have your phone because it's on your phone. And so if it's not on the phone, you don't remember. Or you ask these devices like Alexa, how do I do something? So this is a lot of practice, rehearsal, repetition. Back in the day, some of you remember telephone numbers actually had letters associated with them. So it would be like 463 was like Hopkins 3. That was a mnemonic memory device to help you to remember the phone numbers. Then as there's more and more people, there's all these area codes. You have to remember the area codes. And so now you don't remember anything. It's just in your phone. Memory is probably one of the areas in which I really get upset often, that when younger people forget things, like certainly children forget things, we don't think that they have Alzheimer's disease. We don't attribute it to that. We attribute it to poor nutrition. We attribute it to depression. We attribute it to they don't care to remember whatever it is. We could attribute it to a learning disability. We could attribute it to they haven't really been taught how to remember. But when you get older and you start to have these things we're going to talk about today that happen to everybody, you immediately become terrified that you have Alzheimer's disease. This famous study done where they ask people, if you were lost like in a parking structure in the sense of where your car is, and you're wandering around, you can't find your car, how likely will you be to contact the security? If you were younger, people said, of course I would. This one woman, I think she was in her early 20s, she actually had the security person drive her up and down twice, like 6 floors of a parking structure, an urban parking structure. And then she said, oh, I have my boyfriend's car. I totally forgot. So it was funny. She thought it was funny. The older people in the study said, oh, I would never, ever ask the security, because I would be terrified that they would tell my children, and my children would take the keys away and say that mom or dad should not drive anymore. So same behavior, that you've forgotten where you park your car, totally different attribution about what's going on, and thereby totally different behavior. Memory is something that when we're really little, we do associate with intelligence. If you do well on a test, right, you're a smart kid. You're able to remember like what words mean, what colors are, names of people. We have contests of things in memory. We have things like Jeopardy as a program on television where you have to remember the answers to things. But how in the heck do you do that? Well, when you're little, people do it through rehearsal, repetition. Every time that you see like G, you think of G for green. You see the color green, and then they show you like something green, like a frog. And so then you associate these things together over and over and over again. And your brain, as I always like to say as a gerontologist, when you're really young, is very empty. So there's nothing in it. So it's easy to remember all this stuff. For all of you out there over 85, if I ask you, where did you grow up? What did it look like? What did it sound like? What did it smell like? What was the address of the main house or dwelling that you grew up in? What was the phone number? You could remember all those things. You carry that around for a lifetime. It is so amazing. You ask people, and we're going to see a video today of someone way over 100, in their hundreds. Within milliseconds, they recall all this old information. So that's part of it, is that your brain is empty, and so this is kind of like the foundation of you, of who you are. As you get older, though, the brain kind of gets clogged up with all that information, is one way of looking at it. So you become much more picky about what are you going to put into your memory. So you go and see a movie. Here we are in Hollywood. People go and see movies, and they don't like the movie. They leave in the middle of the movie, and then they can't remember what the movie was, or they can't remember who the actor or actress was. Some of my clients get really, really upset about that and say, oh, I'm so stupid. Oh, I can't remember. And I say, why would you put that information into your head to carry around for the rest of your life if it's not important to you? The things that happened to you when you're young seemingly were unique, different. Your first day of school, the first teacher that you had, your first kiss, your first day in a new job, all of that unique stuff you remember. You meet a person with a unique name, like my name is not Max's most common dog's name, but Maximilian is not that most common of a name. So you're more likely to remember me with that name if my name was like John or Steve or Paul or whatever, much more common names. It's easy when something is unique. The older you are, the harder it is for you to have unique things, right? You've been there, done that, seen hundreds of thousands of movies or actors or actresses or something, and so no wonder that you don't remember this particular one, especially if you don't like them. So I'm going to show you our first slide here, talking about normal cognitive changes. Cognitive means like thinking changes, and thinking does have a lot to do with memory. This is again where we'll say a child is maybe not seen as that bright because their memory is not good. The way that you try to remember things, how you practice remembering, has a lot to do with your cognition, your thinking. Sad to say, it also has a lot to do with how you think about your memory, is how well your memory is going to work for you. So on our slide here, it asks, are you experiencing senior moments? And if you're under, I'll just say under 35, I bet you have junior moments. You forget to do things. I love to always point out when I give these trainings that the younger people who help me to set them up, they forget all kinds of stuff, and they attribute it to that they're sleep deprived, they're stressed, they have all these things to do. We just normalize it. But if you're an older person, even somebody my age, I'm going to be 60 pretty soon, and I start forgetting things, all of a sudden there's this great concern that maybe I shouldn't be working anymore because I've forgotten. So the different types of memory, and memory is a very complicated area. When people think they're like having trouble remembering, forgetting, they don't really look at what the kinds of memory is that they're having problems with. So on our first slide, the first kind of memory is your immediate memory. What am I saying right now? What are you doing right now? If you're sitting down, what is right in front of you? What color is my shirt? What color is the wall behind me? Immediate memory. So you just get much more picky, like I was saying, as you get older about, is that important to remember? We're learning in science that at night, if you sleep at least 4 hours, you're processing everything that you kind of see, eat, are exposed to during the day, and it's kind of just like filtering all that stuff along. So all these things, these images, these things that you see that have no relevance, like why do you need to remember the color of my shirt? You don't. That's just gone. It's just gone. Short-term memory is where information goes after immediate memory. So short-term memory could kind of be like if you're ever writing like a text message or an email, or back in the day that you made like a draft copy of something, you hold on to it for a short period of time. So maybe up to 2 weeks that you put these things from immediate memory into short-term memory. So maybe, this last Sunday was Mother's Day. You had a great time on Mother's Day. It was maybe your, 40th Mother's Day, 30th Mother's Day. You're going to put that in the file of Mother's Day. And the immediate information that you had from Sunday, if you remember it today on Tuesday, it's in short-term memory. But you need more concentration as you get older to do that, because now you're going to put that information of who was at the gathering, what did you have to eat, did you have a good time, did you not have a good time, where was the location. That has to now be separated from all the previous Mother's Days that you've been through. Obviously, this is your first Mother's Day. It's unique. You're going to remember that. Second one, not so much. Third one, not so much. And again, unless it's some big event. It was a really great day. It was a really bad day. The more that you have ways to remember things like an emotional reaction, then you're going to be more likely to remember it. Things then go into long-term storage. So this is like with a computer, with an email, something you're saying, do you want to save it? It says, do you want to save it? And you say, yes, you're going to save it. Well, how long can you save it in a machine? Well, if the machine doesn't fall apart, you can save it. You can take and put it in a different format and save it. But what's amazing we're finding with the human brain is that once it's in long-term memory, unless you have like some kind of problem with your brain, like a brain tumor or a traumatic brain injury, it stays there for forever. So this really old information stays in there for forever. And yet at the same time, you can learn new things. This woman I'm going to be showing you today, Virginia McLaren, she's 106, 107 years old. She's still learning new things. So unlike all these devices where you actually have to go out and like buy new memory for them to keep putting more and more information, now we have terabytes, I think. We used to have kilobytes and gigabytes, now terabytes. The human brain has almost like infinite capacity. But part of, we believe, why you become much more selective about what you put in to the short-term memory is it's no good to you, kind of like putting stuff in a drawer if you cannot find it. And some of you know that when you're searching for things like on Google, if it's not coming up with what you want, it used to say anyway, refine the search, give me more information, more information, more information. And that's what happens with the brain. It's like if you've got more than terabytes of information and you're trying to remember, what is the name of my friend that I graduated from high school with? And she has kind of like a common name. And your brain is searching through like all these people. One of my friends growing up was named an unusual name, Hattie. And so that's easy for me to remember that because it's not that common of a name. But I have another friend whose name was Mary. And so if I've been exposed to like hundreds and hundreds of Marys or thousands of people named Mary, how does my brain just pick that out? The long-term memory, interestingly enough, in older adults is even more vivid. And I don't think that we really understand why that is. But it's sort of like why sometimes younger people get frustrated when they ask older adults a question, because you kind of tell a little story to answer the question. It's not, what was your first day in school like? It's like, I'm going to tell you about my first day in great detail. And so even though the information is there, I could ask my grandson who's 10, tell me about your first day in school. He's not going to give me a lot of information, but if I wait till he's 90 and ask him, that would be interesting, given I'm 50 years older. But at 90, if I could ask him about his first day of school, the way he would remember it would be more vivid. We don't really understand why that is, but that's part of what I really like working with older adults, is just their storytelling. The richness of their stories is so amazing. And again, that they've carried this around in their brain all of those years. On to the next type of memory, episodic. That's kind of what I was mentioning about like an episode, the first day at school, the first date with your boyfriend or girlfriend, your first kind of big event in your family, like the birth of another sibling, when your mom or dad passed away, some kind of event like many of you remember, like the end of World War II or the end of the Korean War. A lot of people remember certainly where they were when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, or more common nowadays, where were you on 9/11, 2001? That's episodic memory. Those are from traumatic events as well as positive events. And it says linear decline. That means that it kind of deteriorates a little bit at a time, kind of like in an organized way. But that older women actually are much better, and we don't really know why that is, except that a lot of memory in human beings is verbal. So that's the way we convey memory, is in telling a story. Very different than asking like an auto mechanic, will you draw me like the first engine that you worked on, or will you show me the parts that you had in the first engine that you worked on? This kind of stuff. Or an architect, like, can you draw me the first building that you designed? That's not verbal, a different kind of memory. Next thing on the list is the semantic memory, which I was saying we tend to oversample a lot as human beings. Word memory. And fascinating studies always show, and certainly with all these machines now, that older people's semantic memory is so much better than younger adults, because you had to remember what things meant. Now you just ask the machines what words mean, and then theoretically they know, and then it's like Einstein had said, you don't have to remember as long as you know how to look things up. And the last type of memory on this list here is procedural memory. So it's like remembering how to do something. If you learn how to ride a bicycle when you were a small child and you haven't ridden for 50 years, I put you on the bicycle, and even though you might have a little bit of balance problems if you're not used to this particular bicycle or you haven't done this for a long time, it comes back to you. And the brain is amazing in that way, in that when you're first learning something, you're actually learning it kind of like one step at a time. And if you that play instruments, like playing the piano, you learn it literally one note at a time. But then when you get really good at playing it, the brain just like remembers the whole song. And some of you know about music memory, that if I ask you to write down, like, what are the lyrics to your favorite song? You say, I can't really do that. But if I start to play the first bar of music, amazingly, you can do that. You can just sing the whole song. Even people that have brain diseases like Alzheimer's disease, it's amazing that they've forgotten how to speak, because that's memory, is learning a language. But when you play music, they can sing a song that they knew. They even sometimes have forgotten how to stand up and walk, which is also memory, learning how to walk. Play music, they can dance. So memory is this amazing sort of thing that, on the one hand, people are so frightened about what's going to happen to it as you get older. And the basic thing I'm going to keep circling back to today in our talk is, the more you worry about losing your memory, the more likely you are to lose it. When I used to teach for years at a university, and I give these exams, I have to give midterm, final exams, this kind of stuff, I could walk in the room and feel this enormous amount of tension in these young people. So it'd be like a room of 50 people. Most of them were in their early 20s. And I would say to them, it's okay. Nobody's perfect. Remember all the things that you've had to pass to get to this point. It doesn't matter if you don't remember it all, it's going to be okay. Anxiety, best treatment for anxiety, is going to be okay. Many of my older clients walk around terrified that they can't remember things. They get so frustrated and irritated. I bet some of you out there know what that's like. You'll just say, I'm so frustrated. And then they say mean things to themselves. I'm losing it. I'm really becoming this horrible, old person that I can't remember anything. You're at Mother's Day and you're having a conversation with someone and you stop for a few seconds, even though to people it feels like minutes, because you've lost your train of thought. And then you get terrified. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. You just lost your train of thought. And these really old people, they'll just say, if it was important, I'll remember it. If it's meaningful to me, I'll remember it. If not, who cares? Nobody dies because you don't remember what we would say on demand. These kind of tasks, like on demand, free recall, where you just I'm going along, saying something, I got to remember it, that becomes so much harder as you get older, because again, you've got more than terabytes of information in your head, and you expect it should just come to you. When you're young, your brain is so empty, of course it comes to you. There's not that much information in there. So I really like to show you these empowering videos. And a few weeks ago, you got to see Jacinto Bonilla doing, this is memory, his name, doing CrossFit. A man almost 80 years old. Well, today I'm going to show you someone who could actually be his mother, a woman named Virginia McLaren. And one of the things I want you to look for in this woman, who's a centenarian in her hundreds, is not just her kind of countenance, how she carries herself, her mood, she's very happy and upbeat, but her memory. Because when you're interviewed by somebody, a lot of people are terrified. They often be interviewed, they got everything written down, they got to read it, whatever. They're so afraid they're going to forget something. This woman has no notes, and she just flows in the conversation. So here's our first little clip of Mrs. Virginia McLaren.
Oh, I'm still happy about that.
And you just started dancing.
Yeah.
She dancing? Come on. So what's the
I was so happy, I didn't care. I just, I really can't dance because I'm too stiff now in the leg.
What do you think of all this attention you're getting? You're a celebrity.
I got too much. I can't get over the attention I'm getting. I done got so old and ugly.
Amazing. Isn't she amazing? This is a woman who got her more than 15 minutes of fame a few years ago. She was there in Washington, D.C. She lives in Washington, D.C. to celebrate Black History Month. And I guess the Obamas heard about her, or someone had researched about her, and so she got to go to the White House and meet the president and his wife. And she's a small person, as many people in their hundreds are. And as you probably know, the Obamas are more on the taller side. So it was kind of an interesting, you can see these online, her dancing with the Obamas. And a lot of what I really enjoy about a person like this, and you're going to be hearing again in all my shows, empowerment of older adults, is all the things this woman has coped with, which she's seen in her lifetime as an African American, as an older woman. She's happy, upbeat. She even volunteers with young kids, and they really just like look up to her. You'll see on YouTube some of these other videos with her about the kids saying, oh, I want to grow up and be just like her. But what I'm wanting you to again see is, if something was related to aging, then these really elderly people should have a lot of it. Does that make sense? So that if Alzheimer's disease was related to aging, then this woman who's almost 110, she should certainly have it, and she doesn't have it. So it has nothing to do with aging. Part of, again, feeling good and upbeat and having purpose and having goals and having people in your life, all the things that she has, contributes a lot to having better concentration, better mood. And as you know, at the beginning of life, that is extremely important in children. If they're depressed, if they're lonely, if they're isolated, if they're bullying, if they're not having good nutrition, they have medical concerns, their memory also is not going to be very good. But we don't attribute it again to Alzheimer's disease. So the next couple slides I'm going to show you hopefully will put your mind at rest. Long time ago, I used to do memory training classes in senior centers, and it would be the most popular topic. But what I was mentioning earlier about 9/11, I always like to tell my story that I can remember of 9/11, 2001, where was I? Well, I live on the West Coast, so this event happened in the morning on the East Coast, as many of you know, so we didn't really hear about it until our morning. And I was scheduled that day, ironically, to give one of these memory trainings. It was called an assisted living facility, where people live often kind of like in a nice hotel. Everything is done for them. And the woman that had asked me to do this was a little bit older than me at that time, and she says, oh, Dr. Fuhrmann, you can't talk about memory. All these people are so upset here about 9/11. You have to come and talk about what happened and try to calm them down. You know, we're all just so upset. Well, I myself obviously was upset because, unlike a lot of my clients, I did not live through Pearl Harbor and not lived through things like this before. This is a unique event. And so I asked my colleagues, who were also all upset, like, how do you talk about what's called, in my field, critical instant debriefing? How do you do that? I have no training in doing that. But the woman had said, I can't get anybody at the last minute. So I throw together like some training. This was supposed to be like an hour training, about the same length that we're doing this talk today. And I start to talk about this, and there are people actually in wheelchairs in the front of this room. There's probably, 50 plus people in there. And they said, they raised their hand, they go, Doctor, we all came to hear about memory. Why are you talking about this event? We all know about this event. We're dealing with it. And the one woman even says to me in the front, she said, I'm sure that you've heard that there's radio and television. We can get the news from that. Why do we need to not hear about memory? We've been looking forward to this for months. So in that moment, what you're actually hearing is the older adults were better at coping with this. They reminded me about living through the Great Depression that many of you did. Reminded me about hearing about Pearl Harbor and only being able to hear about it, not see it, and not even know kind of where it was on a map, and how horrible living through World War II was. All of us, quote, younger people that never went through anything like that, we were the ones who were very, very upset and wanting to focus on that and needing help in coping with that. So this too is a way that we don't empower older adults. We often focus on they can't find where they put their car keys, or they can't find where they park their car, or they walk around with the glasses on top of their head like, where are my glasses? and we demean them and almost shame them for things like that and say, you know, you need to go in a home. And we forget, literally, no pun intended, that they have lived through all these events, which allows them to cope so much better than us, quote, younger folks do. And that was a huge example that day where it was the staff who were younger people. They wanted me, Dr. Fuhrmann, the psychologist, to come and calm them down, which was also strange because how was I supposed to do that? I didn't really know what was going to happen either. So part of what I went over that day, which helped me to calm down, was the slides I'm going to show you. So our first one, we talk about green is good and red is bad in these slides. Normal, again, is what happens to everybody. So a normal change in memory just means that you forget like where you left your checkbook. And a lot of people don't even have checkbooks anymore. So you forgot like where you put the piece of paper. You forgot like where you put your phone. And I like to, quote, remind older adults that these phones now, my new phone, has like a way that it can tell you where it is. So if younger people never forgot things, why would software designers take time to make something like that to tell you where the phone is, or to tell you where the car is, or reminders like on a calendar? Younger people forget things all the time, but we don't make the same attribution. So this is a very different thing than in the other column. In the red column, you forget in which bank you have the account. That's an entirely different phenomenon. Repeating a story to a friend or partner that you had previously told them. I think one thing I've observed a lot of older adults will do is say, well, stop me if I told you this before. And some people don't remember that you told them before, so you could tell them again. It's no big deal. Very different that you repeat the same story over and over again and have no memory that you're doing that. That's a really warning sign that there's something going on with your brain that you're not remembering, that maybe just 15 minutes ago, like you told that story. When people get things like Alzheimer's disease, this was a story about President Reagan. After he was no longer president, that he was known as like this storyteller. So he'd be in the middle of telling these stories to people, and then he'd tell them again, or he'd kind of like lose track of where he was in the story. This was the beginning of him getting Alzheimer's disease, doing things like that. Because for most people, they're storytellers, myself included, is kind of like someone singing a song. You start the beginning of it, and it just flows out of you. So if all of a sudden you're kind of like stopping in the middle, that's a problem. Forgetting what you ate for breakfast yesterday. If it wasn't anything spectacular or different, this is why people say, well, I eat the same thing every day, so it makes it easier to remember. Same thing with your keys, right? If you need to remember where you put your keys or your glasses, you put it in the same place, and then that's all you got to remember, is that one thing. If you put it in different places, then every day you got to remember something different. Forgetting that you ate breakfast 15 minutes ago, obviously a huge difference from forgetting what you ate for breakfast yesterday. And so a lot of people with things like Alzheimer's disease will go around and say, I'm hungry, I didn't get fed, where's my food? They just ate. Using calendars and lists as memory aids. As I was talking about, younger people do this all the time. They have all these devices to remind them, prompt them. The car like reminds you like this is where you're going. You rely on the car now to even tell you where you're going. You don't have to remember those kinds of things. An exercise I used to give to my students is, can you write down how you got to the class today? And that's really difficult if it's later in the semester. In the beginning, if they were like freshmen just going to this college or university, that's easier because when you go to an unfamiliar place, it's all these things you have to remember. But we're going to get lazier and lazier and lazier in that way, correct? Maybe our brains will get tuned into something else. We're not needing to remember directions anymore because now the car remembers, the navigation device remembers, but what if it breaks down? Guess who will be able to find their way? The older adults. Do not understand the nature of a calendar. That is a huge difference, right? If I show you a calendar, I ask a lot of people things like, what year is it? That may be a part of a memory test. But to ask people what the date is, who knows what the date is? You just look it up. It's May today. It's May 14th. But if that has no relevance to you, if it's not a special day for you, it's not your birthday, it's not some big deadline day for you, why would you remember that? So if anyone's ever testing your memory and asking you things like that, try to get through to the examiner, it has to be something that's relevant for you. I was trained, we used to ask people things like memory questions, like, who is the mayor of the town that you live in? Maybe you don't care who the mayor is. Sorry, mayors, but maybe they don't care. If it's not important to you in your daily life, then why would I ask you that? Same thing nowadays, asking younger people, what is your telephone number? What's the telephone number of your best friend? They can't remember that. But I would ask them, how would you access it? How would you call the person? That's also memory. That's what we call functional memory, and that would be hugely different. So now I'm going to show you the next little section on Mrs. Virginia McLaren. And again, what I'm just sort of marveling at is how easily she goes from current information to past information without skipping a beat as she's being interviewed. Amazing person. Somebody I obviously look up to.
I am so happy to be in the White House and to see the president, the black president, the first one. I was born in South Carolina, and I was raised up on the sharecrop. And after I grew up in South Carolina, my parents moved to Raleigh, where we could go, where I was living in South Carolina. You couldn't go no higher than.
So the next time that someone says to you, well, your memory is just falling apart because you're old, you could say to the person, do you ever have trouble forgetting? One of the hallmarks of getting a dementia, we talk a lot about dementia in some future shows, is that you don't remember that you don't remember. So you wouldn't remember like watching any of this. You go back and watch it over and over again. It's actually a technique that's used with people that are very agitated that have Alzheimer's disease, is they could watch something like their favorite game, like some kind of sports event, a baseball game, a football game, over and over and over again, especially if it was like a great game, because they don't remember that they just watched it. That's very, very different than you remembering what you forgot. A lot of clients who come to me with depression, and one symptom of depression is poor concentration and thereby poor memory. People will say, I just can't remember anything. I have no use. I have no purpose. Why am I still alive? Nobody asks for my advice. Nobody cares about what I have to say. I sit around and I'm so forgetful. So one of the assignments I actually give to them, because in therapy I do have people do homework from time to time, is I ask them, will you write down the things that you forget in the week before you come back and see me? And the irony of this is they're telling me that they're very forgetful, that they can't remember anything anymore, and sometimes people come back with like 3 pages of things that they're forgetting. So as long as you're remembering what you're forgetting, you're fine. The more that you don't get good sleep at night is a huge contributor to people's memory problems. This too, we believe, is probably why a lot of younger people are showing this kind of memory impairment with the reliance on the devices to remind them and so forth and so on, where their car is, where their phone is. If you don't get good quality sleep, it very much affects your concentration. And without good concentration, just like in little kids, the information is not getting into you. So what's great about this new technology, right? If you want to review any of the things that we're talking about, there it is for you to go back into some of these systems that you're viewing this on and look at these slides again. So our last slide, continuing on, what's green is good and what's red is bad. That's a mnemonic technique to kind of like associate. Whenever you see red, right, you think bad, you think stop, like emergency, something bad. When you think green, you think good, something growing, something developing. So that's one of the reasons I use the red and the green. Being disoriented for a moment when you're waking up in a hotel, especially when you're traveling, that's very normal because you're asleep. The great mystery of sleep, like what happens when you're asleep. We're still trying to figure out what actually goes on, let alone your kind of consciousness. Where does that go? So when you wake up, and especially if you're a person that travels a lot where I do, It's like you can have more than a few seconds of like, oh, okay, where am I? That's entirely normal. Getting lost in your home that you've lived in for a long time, that's not normal. Many of you, if you've lived in the same home for a long time, you probably could walk around with a blindfold on and not walk into anything. Know where the steps are, know where the edges of things are, the furniture, things in the bathroom. It's very much part of memory, again, what we call visual spatial memory, to know where you are. So a person that's showing this kind of disorientation, a familiar place, you can often see it in people like taking public transportation. They get on the wrong bus. They get on the wrong train. They're driving here in Southern California. They get off on the wrong off-ramp. And it's robotic to some extent. If you've been doing this for a long time, the car kind of knows where to go. And all of a sudden you're confused. You're like, this doesn't look familiar to me. That can be a warning sign that you're starting to develop a disease. But it can also be a warning sign that something is going on that's reversible with your memory. Or maybe you haven't slept well. Maybe you've been having allergy and you're taking allergy medication, for example, and that could be affecting your concentration as well. So I want to also circle back and remind you of this, that even if you're having some of these quote red things, the abnormal things, that doesn't mean it's Alzheimer's disease. It could be from something as simple as you have a cold or a flu, or that you're taking medication that's affecting your sleep, or that you're having some other kind of medical condition from the neck down, as it were, that's affecting your memory. Forgetting to turn off a boiling pot and burning the pot a couple times. Again, this is some of this newer technology. It turns itself off, that it knows like it's been dormant for a while. And so again, if people weren't having this problem, they would not spend the extra money on engineers and technology to create this kind of issue where you're not going to then be able to light things on fire like you used to. But no memory of putting a pot on the stove. Huge difference, correct? That you would probably reproach yourself, be angry with yourself and say, look, here I burned this pot. I remember doing this. This is terrible. I have to be more careful. And these little notes that you can stick, these little sticky notes now, those are really good to help you. And yet people have shame about that. It's like, I'm older, I don't want to have memory notes all over the house. But if you've had this issue with not remembering to turn the pot off because you got distracted, the phone rang, you went in the other room, there was something else that took your attention away from doing that, you're not feeling well, you're in chronic pain, you're taking medication, all these things could affect you. If you have some little sticky note there over, on the oven, looking you in the face saying turn the pot off, that will remind you. That again is like a mnemonic cue to remind you. Sometimes forgetting where you parked your car. We already touched on this in this earlier study. This is why a lot of places will have association. You're on level C and it'll have a picture of corn next to it. Or it will tell you right at the elevator that you're going to take down in a parking structure, this is where your car is. And now what I'm seeing younger people do with their cell phone is take a picture of where the car is. And so then it tells you, you don't want to have a picture I'm next to the white car, obviously, but a picture of what level you're on, what street you're on. Because part of why people forget these things is it's not salient. It's not important to what you're doing. You're going into a mall to go shopping. You're going in to visit a friend. You're trying to find in a congested urban area parking. And so you've driven around trying to find parking. You're late. You're focused on all those things. And that's why you don't remember where the car is, because it wasn't important to you to do that. And younger people do that all the time. So forgetting that you drove to the mall or that you even have a car, you can hear the difference in that. Just being very oblivious to I don't even know what's going on. I couldn't find my car. Asking people, what kind of car do you have? How did you get here today? And you get this kind of blank stare. That's very, very different. And the last thing that we have on our list that I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on as a psychologist is worrying about your memory. What's worrying? Worrying is fretting, right? Some of the ancient cultures used to have worry stones. And we're tactile as human beings, like little babies. We rock them to comfort them. If you're worrying all the time about your memory, it's going to make your memory so much worse. One of the first shows that I did, we talked about what is a theory of why aging happens. And one of the theories is inflammation, that you're upset, that you're agitated. Well, worrying is part of being agitated. If you're going around all the time saying, I have to cover up to my family that I'm losing my mind, people will say, I'm losing who I am. I used to be so bright. I could do all these things. I could remember all the names of the people I was introduced to. I could remember movies that I was seeing. Now I can't remember. And it's so frustrating. And then people dwell on this, which is really interesting. They dwell on forgetting. It doesn't look like Virginia McLaren is the kind of person who does that, and that's a memory thing, right? You're remembering the name of the woman that I showed you 2 clips of. There is nothing more nominal than names. If a person doesn't have an unusual name like me, you're not going to probably remember their name. How do you separate out sorry, John, the most common man's name, right? In the United States, for white men, John. How are you going to separate one John from kinds of tests? So she was kind of demeaning of me and my tests and my education. So when I was leaving her house after about an hour, I said, well, you may be a much braver person than I am, because I think even if I had been driving as long as you have been, that I would have been terrified about what happened to the car. And she says, well, I really wasn't. She said, it was really my husband's fault. And I looked at her kind of confused, and I said, well, I thought your husband had passed. She said, oh, he did, a while ago. I don't think she could actually remember how long ago, but she said a while ago. And I said, so, ma'am, how would this be his fault? And she said, well, he planted this big tree in the front of the house, and I just, it just jumps out in front of me. So I went and looked at the tree, and I looked at the car, and there was no evidence that that tree and car had ever had a meeting. But she remembered it that way. And so that's a lot of what I'm getting at is this woman had this accident. And this was a big deal. But she had no memory of the accident. So she's giving this story that was kind of funny. She was even kind of joking about, like, it's, you can blame your husband who's dead, I guess, and that's okay. But this gradually uncaring is a lot of, we were talking about earlier President Reagan. There's a story that Nancy Reagan used to tell that he brought a ceramic representation about this big to his wife of the White House and handed it to her and said, I don't really know what this is, but I think I had something to do with this. And he smiled at her and walked away. And in that moment, she was devastated that he had no memory of when the White House was, his president, right? He lived in the White House, they live in the White House, but it didn't bother him. And it profoundly bothered her. So I always like to say, as a gerontologist, that not only am I not going to worry, I make a promise to myself, I'm not going to worry about the things that I forget, work out or won't work out, but if I actually do develop something like Alzheimer's disease, I'm not going to care. It's devastating to the people around me, but at this point in time, there's nothing that we can do about it. There was something just on the radio as I was driving in to the studio today where they were saying that brand new study shows that all these things that people were taking to help them with their memory, omega-3 and vitamins, minerals, it doesn't really show that it, quote, prevents Alzheimer's disease. But that they were saying that movement, like movement from the neck down, having a positive attitude, being happy, upbeat, having people in your life, that made a big difference. So that's what we're getting at, is if you sit around all day and fret about not being who you once were, which whatever that means, it's like, are any of us who we once were? The other thing that I find really interesting about memory is the science shows us that it's very much related to our mood state in terms of what we remember about something. Many of you know that you could sit around and kind of reminisce, like let's say that you're with your high school friends or your middle school, we used to call it junior high friends, elementary, grammar school friends, and you could reminisce about something that happened in the school, and you might all remember it differently. Does that mean that one person's right and everybody else is wrong? No, that again, it's this subjective kind of thing of how you remember the associations, what it meant to you, if you were really happy about it, if you're really upset about it, if it's kind of part of your identity. One of the things that's unfortunate in people that get depressed often is they have a tendency to kind of be what I call loyal to suffering, which is an ancient term from philosophy. So they'll go over this like litany of, this person did this to me, or my shoulder was injured like 40 years ago and it hurts me every day. And you're kind of going over and over and over the same thing in a negative way. So then that makes it easy, sad to say, to remember it that way. People who are very upbeat and happy, especially these really old people like Virginia McLaren, they don't tend to do that. They're much more in the present, what's happening today. I'm taking it in. I'm remembering kind of what I'm able to remember. You let go of all these things. It's like, who wants to remember all these negative things anyway? And yet that's obviously, if you're worrying about the things that you're forgetting, that's what you're doing without realizing it. I mean, kind of an exercise you can give yourselves out there is to say, what are some of the worst things that you've forgotten? Like things that you're really supposed to remember. There was a big meeting a couple weeks ago where I live, and the president forgot to come to the meeting. So that was kind of a big deal because she was supposed to be leading this meeting and she wasn't there. She forgot about it. But nobody died from that. So the wise elders out there, you know what I'm talking about, that if you go over these things that were really bad at the time that you forgot, like you failed a test because you couldn't remember any of the answers because you were like a deer in the headlights, you were terrified that you just couldn't do well in this test, and so you didn't do well in this test. You were supposed to do something for your boss and you totally forgot. You forgot how to do it. You forgot how to use the machine, whatever it was. It didn't kill you because you're still alive. So that's ultimately what I work on as a psychologist, is like what we're most afraid of. What's the worst if that happens? Then what happens? The worst thing most people are afraid of, which is one of the reasons we're afraid of aging, is dying. So that you forgot something. So what? People will say, oh, I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings because I can't remember their name. If you remember them and you remember experiences you have with them, that's probably more valuable to them than you actually remembering the person's name. Because to some people, their name is really not their identity. Even recognition of people. I'm not particularly good at recognizing faces. That's just not something I'm good at. So I remember people more in terms of their voice, the things that we shared together. But a lot of people take that on again, like, oh, my daughter's going to be so upset when she knows that I can't remember like something that's important to her. I can't remember the name of the company she works for. I can't remember some gym that she goes to. These kind of minute details that my clients get really, really upset about, as if it's going to hurt the feelings of the other person. And the point I'm emphasizing as a psychologist to all of you is the more emotional you are about forgetting things, the worse it's going to become. If you just let it go and say, that's really not important. The name of something is not important. You remember who your daughter is. You remember that you love her, that you care about her, that you give her compassion, validation, empathy. You remember that stuff. That's the important stuff. Not that you remember like the company that she works for. Again, it's probably just a name. It's a person's name. It's the name of some product. It has no relevance necessarily in your life. So that's why you can't remember it. Things that are important to you are why you remember it. The people that you love and you care about, you remember their stories, their part in your life. But these other sort of things, like I'm saying, in kind of like a silly way, if I went to some play or some movie or read some book or something and I particularly like it, why would I clog my brain with the data from it? Sometimes when people are actually testing your memory, they ask you to remember words that don't mean anything to you. Some of you may have had these tests done before. That's to see if you can take in new information. But if the information, again, is not relevant to you, then maybe you're not going to do very well. But asking you, like, what street do you live on now? That seems relevant to you. Asking how you would get from where we are to your house is relevant to you. Asking, what are the names of your children? There's names, which you probably had some role in picking. Asking how you would connect with your children is salient in your life, one would think. Asking the name of your partner, your spouse. Asking where you first met, where you had your first kiss, where you got married. These are very important milestones in your life. Even where you were when you decided to divorce the person, where you were when you heard that your parent had died or was dying. These are important things in your life. So if those are the things that you're struggling to remember, that's more of a problem. But again, circling back to, it doesn't mean that it's something like Alzheimer's disease. It could be something as simple literally as that you're on a blood pressure medication that's affecting your thinking because you're not getting enough blood flow to your brain, or that you're not sleeping well because you have chronic pain. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to rush to diagnose you with Alzheimer's disease. So a lot of what I'm talking about today are things to remember. Again, if it's important to you, you remember it. If you can relate to it, you remember it. If not, as I would say with any of these shows, you're the wise elder. The point of all of this is take what's meaningful and cast out the rest. So to kind of do a little bit of review, because this is also part of memory, we've now had shows where we've covered what actually is aging, what happens when we're aging, what it is, what it's not. We've also covered why does it happen, theories of why it happens, because we're not really sure why it happens. We also did a show on Chinese medicine, which is a very different kind of topic, so that might have been easier in a way for you to remember, yeah, I remember that show. Today's show has been a lot about what people forget, why they forget it, why they get upset when they don't remember it, because the overarching issue is none of us typically wants to admit in a youth-oriented culture that you're getting older. So if you find that you're forgetting things, and you just say like you're over 40 or even 45, you become terrified that that's a sign that you're aging. But you've been aging since you were born, and you're going to continue to age as you watch these shows. Every week you're going to be a week older. No matter what I say or what I do, you can't stop it. You can't prevent it. And you can't stop these changes in memory. There are people that give lectures in their 90s. How do they do that? They have notes like I have notes. And if they come to things that they can't remember, they just say, it's really not important. It's not salient to what I'm teaching you. It's an old saying that most of you have forgotten, right? More than younger people have learned. So we end, as I'm going to with most shows, if I remember, empower yourself, feel good about yourself. Aging is not a disease. Thank you so much for listening.